All right, guys. Just first, a word on this question from Friday. Um, we all remember it. When I was leaving class, this is the dangerous thing, guys, about second guessing yourself and looking too far into these questions and that becoming an issue. Because I think a lot of people are looking at A, like it should be the right answer if this says not equal instead of equal. The answer here is C. Federal government should be the instrument of the people, not of the various states, would be the only right answer if you really think about it, right? This is exactly as it should be, this question, okay? No changes. But as it was under the Articles of Confederation, it was an instrument of the states. That was the issue, right? That was the concern that Daniel Shays was trying to make is a representative, albeit an armed representative of the people, but he was a representative of the people, truly, not of the states. So I just thought we'd hone in on that one because I actually took it down because so many people had these concerns about it. Maybe it was just a vocal majority, not really the majority in class. So let's just be careful, guys, about how we assert our opinions in the classroom because there was nothing wrong with this question. This is exactly as it should be, and again, the answer is C. Okay, so any questions with that, we can concern ourselves with tomorrow, or maybe just on Edmodo. But so a little historical context. Tomorrow we want to start looking at, and tomorrow we'll just look at this one court case, Marbury versus Madison, and truly the number one Supreme Court case. This is the most famous in American history. So I thought it'd be a worthwhile thing for us to look at some of the elements of it. I put a couple of really good clips, one of which I used in many ways for this screencast. So if you're having trouble understanding my characterization of the case, you might want to just look at those clips. So they do a really good job too. So make sure you do that. Some things we need to know about the Supreme Court case. Oh, and another thing, just I put up a small assignment. It's due for Friday, and it is due Friday. Okay, of some other early court cases, all from the Marshall Court. Okay, the courts, you'll see as we go through this part of American history, this aspect of American history always takes the name of its Chief Justice. In this case, it will be John Marshall. So make sure you take that seriously. We'll look through Marbury v. Madison in class tomorrow, but the other ones I want you to take a look at. So writ of mandamus, right, is simply a mandate, okay? And what it basically is saying is that it's empowering the Supreme Court to be able to basically force an issue they feel should be forced, okay, or enforced, okay. They can do more with this power than was the original intent of the framers. Is really the point. So where it comes into context, and we haven't really looked at Marbury yet, but Marbury asks for one from the Supreme Court, and that is really the center of this court case. Is that writ of mandamus? So we really need to know what that is. Marshall happens to be the deliverer of all commissions. So these are sort of the roles we have to kind of keep in mind. We'll go back to this slide in a moment, but I want you just to be aware of a couple things. All right. So let's just look through some of this context. Okay. John Adams was president. He's a one-term president. Okay. He has been ousted in the election for 1800, right? And he is in 1800, that is. And he's now what they call a lame duck president. Okay. In other words, he is not going to be somebody who can have the same kind of strength he had before. He knows Jefferson's coming in, but he has this period of November, December, January, February, and March, because March during this period of time was the inauguration date, not January like it is currently. And he spends most of his time with two things on his mind. First, the Federalists are about to lose a great deal of power, right? There's going to be a Republican president in Jefferson. There's going to be a largely Republican Congress. The only place we really can continue any strength would be in the Supreme Court. So he spends, the other thing on his mind is signing appointments for new judges. Remember, the president has the ability to appoint judges, okay? And he is appointing federal judges that are Federalist friendly, or Federalists themselves, of course, all over, okay? He can't sign them fast enough, okay, until he's eventually replaced by Jefferson. When Jefferson comes into the office, he realizes there's a stack of commissions that have not yet been delivered. Okay, they just haven't gotten out yet. Okay, one of which is William Marbury. Okay, now remember, it is the job of the executive branch, the office of the presidency, to seal their seal of approval on these commissions first. Okay, that role is actually the responsibility for that role is in the Secretary of State, which at this point happens to be James Madison. Okay, just like Jefferson was the Secretary of State under Washington, James Madison is now Secretary of State under um, Thomas Jefferson. So Marbury, of course, is upset. He has not received his commission because Jefferson has halted the ability of the Supreme Court to even operate, and this of the commissions, excuse me, to be delivered. Okay, so what Marbury does is he petitions the Supreme Court through what we mentioned a moment ago, which is called the writ of mandamus, a mandate. Okay, and as part of the Judiciary Act, okay, the Judiciary Act of 1789, okay, accordingly, the Supreme Court can use this writ of mandamus to force an issue. And Marbury is hoping the Supreme Court will force, okay, the executive branch, the president, this is, right, to issue his commission. Okay. So we're in a tough spot. Okay, we're in a really tough spot because remember, it's Marshall that actually has to deliver these things once they're sealed by the Secretary of State. Okay, I just bolded this out because sometimes students get confused over some of the semantics here, and that Secretary of State actually used to be John Marshall, but now he's Supreme Court Chief Justice. Okay, new Secretary of State is James Madison. Okay, so just, you know, I just bolded it out because sometimes it becomes a little confusing for people. So Marshall's in a tough spot, right? If he rules for Marbury, he looks partisan. We know the definition of that now, hopefully, and weak, especially if Jefferson ignores the ruling, because Jefferson might just say, listen, I'm not even going to pay attention to this. Supreme Court, you know, is the weakest of our three branches, as designed by the Constitution, right? And, you know, maybe he doesn't even agree with most of what's happening in that world anyway. We know there's a lot of change in 1800s election, right? 1800 election. And Jefferson is, you know, likely to ignore it. So he's a little afraid of that. But he also looks partisan. If he rules for Marbury, he's going to look like a big-time Federalist who happens to be in the Supreme Court. Okay, he actually is that, though. So now, if he rules for Madison, the court looks subservient to the executive branch. So either way, he's in a tough spot. You know, if he rules for one person, Marbury rules for Madison, the other person, he's in bad shape. So what he decides to do, okay, is he says the entire case is actually unconstitutional because Section 13 of the Judiciary Act of 1789, which actually refers to this writ of mandamus in the first place, saying the Supreme Court can actually do these things, okay, he's saying is unconstitutional because it expands the court's original scope of original jurisdiction. It's something they can't even do. It's breaking the Constitution, okay? Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution specifically lays out what the Supreme Court can do, okay? Not that they cannot do, but can do. And Section 13 of the Judiciary Act 1789 is actually is unconstitutional. This part of this law, okay, is unconstitutional. So in other words, instead of ruling for Marbury or ruling for Madison, okay, Marshall's saying, I can't even rule this. You know, don't even bring me into this argument because I'm not. This law is unconstitutional. It's out. It's null and void. Okay, we're actually getting rid of it. Okay, so this expands for the first time something I've asked you to define a couple times, which is judicial review. Okay, and really the reality is, guys, judicial review and Marbury versus Madison go hand in hand. Anything on the AP test, you know, referring to judicial review is going to refer to Marbury versus Madison. Anything on the AP test referring to Marbury versus Madison is going to refer to judicial review. So in either case, you have to be sure of this relationship, okay, and what it actually is doing and how it really is now, through this precedent, this tradition that's now been set through common law, is really empowering the Supreme Court way beyond what anybody had anticipated in Article 3 when it was originally drafted. And anything in Federalist 80, everything, actually all the 80s pretty much are about the Supreme Court, and some of the late 70s, okay, about the Supreme Court. So this is just a phenomenal case. It sets us up very nicely for the other cases that are part of your homework assignment. So general thoughts on the Supreme Court. I just thought I'd throw some things in. All right, we'll look at this in class. Okay, so we'll skip that for now. But just some things we really need to be sure about, okay, is that the founders wanted to make sure that no leader took on too much power, created a fundamental law that can't be transgressed in the creation of the Supreme Court, right? The Constitution protects our popular sovereignty or the people's rights, people's power to rule, right? Consent of the governed, remember, it comes from the people, right? Kind of goes back to this question up here, as a matter of fact. All right, you just saw some daily quiz stuff as well. You know, really, really important, guys. You understand the philosophy behind the creation of this, okay? And, you know, there hasn't really been any mechanism before judicial review to actually do it. Okay, but with Marbury versus Madison, this becomes evident and becomes now a real concern. All right, um, and through the brilliance of John Marshall and judicial review, we have an answer to that question. Okay, Alexis de Tocqueville, right, from France, is one of the best, some of the best writings we have on early American history during this period and the later period is from Tocqueville. Okay, and the things that he writes. And one of the couple of the things he said was that scarcely any political question arises in the United States that is not resolved sooner or later into a judicial question. So judicial review is that important, guys. Everything comes back to judicial review. Everything comes back to a court in some place, right? Supreme Court, of course, being that supreme, that last sort of say in what's happening here. So particularly true for controversial issues. If you think about abortion, civil rights, criminal rights, gay rights, whatever it might be, as part of civil rights, obviously. These things will always be eventually decided in a court someplace, okay, and most likely the Supreme Court. Power to just review, I just threw a couple things in here because we were just talking about loose constructionism versus strict constructionism. In the Supreme Court, it still exists, but it's referred to a little bit differently, right? Judicial activism would be known as the loose constructionism or loose interpretation of something, right? For loose constructionism, we've used the Constitution. Judicial activism would be, the events, the episodes that bring the cases to them that they hear, and so on and so forth, right? So again, we'll look at a little bit more of this tomorrow, some of the framework, some of the way this stuff is set up. But I thought it'd be a good idea just to kind of crack the ice open a little bit on Marbury v. Madison because it is a very complex case to understand. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow.